Hello, hello. Welcome back for another episode of Six Rotations. Here we sit towards the end of November. A couple of the conferences have been wrapped up. We'll talk about that at the end of the episode, but we've got a fun week coming up, as always, brought to you by SNA Sports, better equipment for a better game. He's Mick Haley, I'm Daniel Gilman, and we can jump right into things here, Mick, in terms of level of chaos. It wasn't necessarily high. The top 10 teams went 20-0 and stayed the same here this week. So why don't we start off by just showing that? Let's look at the top 10 for the AVCA coaches poll. Not much has changed. Coming up in front of a Wisconsin-Nebraska week, which people like to comment. Why is that a big deal? Do you want to tell them? I mean, this is the big matchup that we have the last 3-4 years. It has been Wisconsin-Nebraska. So of course we're going to get excited for it.
Well, and not only that, Wisconsin's trying to get back in the picture to host a regional, and that's not only big for Wisconsin, that's big for television with 18,000 fans showing up or whatever their draw is, but it's over 13, and it's a prelude to what's going to happen now. I've noticed something about Wisconsin that the coaches' eyeball test is moving them up. The coaches that have been watching Wisconsin play think they're on the upswing. If you look at all the other indicators, other than the coaches poll, they're all keeping Wisconsin down to 8, 9, or 7 in that area. But the coaches feel the intensity of the Wisconsin effort. And the proof in the pudding is how well they do with Nebraska. Now, Nebraska, on the other hand, has been lobbying for first place. I have seen everything from tweets to emails to everything out there of everybody trying to push Nebraska, including Nebraska, quite honestly, into first place. I don't think that buys them anything, but it's just a prestige thing. Even on the NC2A website, there are specials on Nebraska. I see nothing about Pitt. And Pitt is doing it big time. Now, Nebraska has improved themselves. But the real question will be how they stack up against Wisconsin. And this is Wisconsin's opportunity to show us they're ready to move forward. So that's why I think it's a big deal.
Yeah, we've also got Purdue, Penn State coming up this upcoming week, Georgia Tech, Florida State, Georgia Tech, Miami. Some important matchups, but not necessarily a star-studded lineup. Meanwhile, you talk about Pitt. They took care of the two ACC teams in Florida with sweeps over the weekend of Florida State and Miami. Nebraska dropped a set against Minnesota, swept Indiana. They have now won 40 straight home games, 23 straight overall. And so we've got two upcoming matchups that'll prove Nebraska's worth. They host Wisconsin on Saturday night on Big Ten Network, and then they go to Penn State on Black Friday. So Penn State has an interesting finish to their season. They swept Illinois and took Maryland in 4 sets on the road. But you talk about Wisconsin, Mick, and we can kind of wrap it here with these kind of teams and move on to the rest of the leagues. But Wisconsin shorthanded took on UCLA. They swept USC with everyone. No Gigi, no Lola Shoemaker. So Sage Dambro had to be the libero on Sunday, and it was an Anna Smrek performance, and we love our Anna Smrek conversations. Nick, have you gotten any feedback about the way you say your name?
No, and I still don't know how you say her name. I listen to 7 different people and I get 6 different pronunciations. And I don't know if her dad had this trouble or not, but yeah, I just say it the way it sounds, and hopefully people get the idea.
I am firmly on the camp of not correcting legends. I think you could do whatever you want, but Anna Spreck had 16 kills. She hit 609 in the win for Wisconsin. So yes, we're very excited moving into that one on Saturday night, 8 o'clock Eastern on Big Ten Network. Now, Mick, we gave away some jackets this past week, some hoodies, and it came down to how many total upsets there would be. And we had 4 people guess that there were 2 upsets. And the upsets that came through were Kansas State sweeping TCU and USC with a reverse sweep of Oregon. So our 2 big upsets led to winners Jim, Serena, Ricardo, and Taryn to to win our prizes is, this is the most we've given away in a week. So I'm curious to see what this one will bring. All right, everyone, get ready. This is what the giveaway is going to be this week. Email us at sixrotations@gmail.com, SIX rotations. We have three big Big Ten games. Minnesota, Wisconsin on Wednesday, Purdue, Penn State on Thursday, Big Ten Network at 6 o'clock, and then Wisconsin, Nebraska. We want the total amount of aces in those three matches. We're shaking it up for you, Mick. And I'll tell you what, Purdue, Penn State. Purdue is on a winning streak as well. The Boilermakers swept Illinois on Sunday. They've won six straight.
Yeah, we need to speak just a minute about Purdue and those of you that stayed up late to watch that USC match, that comeback with Oregon, you deserve those jackets because you had to be watching real late to catch that one. But Purdue is in a funny situation. The coaches are giving them a lot of credit for those two left sides and Colvin in the middle carrying the offensive load. On the other hand, all of the other rating tools have got them out of the top 16, which means they wouldn't host, and which means they might get sent to Dayton because in this pool the coaches don't think Dayton's top 16, but all the other indicators got Dayton up at 14 or 13, which is a hosting spot. So Purdue has a chance to enlighten themselves with the committee by taking on Penn State and taking on this other match to really prove that they deserve to be in that top eight. And getting them in the top eight is important, not for anything other than the seeding purposes and the committee seeing them for what the coaches really think they are.
Meanwhile, Purdue will finish out in the Pacific Northwest at Oregon, at Washington. Finishing off our top 10 here, Arizona State beat Cincinnati on Saturday. They have now won 14 straight. They are looking like the powerhouses coming out of the Pac-12, now leading the way in the Big 12. Kansas had a big bounce back effort to kind of push us into the rest of the poll here. We'll talk about them in a second. SMU, meanwhile, with a 4-set win over Miami and a 3-set win over Florida State. I think SMU is looking like a secured hosting spot in that 10 spot. Let's look at the rest of our top 25 here. Kansas at 11, Mick. Kansas, they had a crap week last week. There's no other way to describe it with the two losses. How about a bounce back? You beat TCU in 4 and Baylor in 3, two top 25 wins there for Kansas.
And not only that, almost every scouting or every rating service right now that has a poll out there has got Kansas at 11. So it looks like the coaches did a pretty good job with that, and they didn't lose heart when Kansas had that bad week, and Kansas didn't lose heart because they've come back and really done it. And Kansas, remember, is a team that gives you almost as few points as Creighton or Pittsburgh. They're right around the 6 gives only in a set. And when teams only give away that many points, they always have a chance to win. So that's why I think nobody's counting Kansas out.
Now tell me about the SEC, Mick. Kentucky had a nice comeback win over Georgia. Florida, Missouri, that one that was fun for the fans. I thought we were ready for the big upset. Florida runs away with the 5th set, 15-6. How about Kennedy Martin sets a new program record with 32 kills?
Yeah, I don't think Florida ran away with that 5th set. I think Kennedy Martin ran away with that 5th set. They set her almost every ball. Unbelievable. I think she had 32 kills and 60 swings, or reverse 30 kills and 62 swings, something like that. But she took charge. She may be the best attacker in the country right now.
Meanwhile, you talk about USC, and they've got an upcoming matchup. They've jumped up from 23 to 21, and they'll take on Purdue this weekend. How about what the Trojans did in the 5th set? Oregon kind of handed it to them. I think it was a couple service errors, a net violation, another ball handling error, 5 non-hitting errors in the 5th set for Oregon in that one. But USC needed that win. I think if they beat Purdue this weekend, they've got a chance to bump up into the top 16.
Well, they do, and that's why the Purdue match, not only with USC but with Penn State, the Purdue's got to win those. USC's got to win those. I mean, these are as fun a matches as you're going to see out there because there's something on the line for each one of these teams. So they will be just gunning for each other and trying to move themselves up, no question.
So I can hear the people at home saying, well, you didn't talk about Louisville. You didn't talk about Creighton. You didn't talk about Stanford. Not a lot of notability going on there. Creighton finishes a perfect home season. They continue to play their softball Big East opponents until the tournament. They're undefeated. Louisville, a team that just keeps beating really mediocre teams, and they're also beating all the good teams. I don't really have too much to say. I think Louisville's securely in a top four spot. Stanford, on the other hand, is a team that I have not been impressed with. A sweep over Virginia, though, is always going to turn heads because you never know which ones are going to come and bite you. Stanford's avoiding the big upset, though.
Stanford's improved their offense, maybe half a point per set, which is important at this point. They're into the 18s now, which helps them there. What the reason that you're not hearing much about them is because they're not beating anybody that's better than them, and they're playing teams that are not as good as them. Their talent is, I think, 5 through 8. Right there is where the Stanford team is right now, and for them to win and upset some people and get into the Final Four, they have to reduce errors. They have to get their errors down to where Creighton is. Creighton is down to 6. They're down to 6. And that's what Purdue has tried to do is they've tried to reduce their errors and increase their offense. So there's some real battles going on that aren't for first and second, but they're for security. They want to host in the first and second rounds. The top 16 are going to get to host. And when you look at the polls, the AVCA coaches poll in particular, the coaches think certain teams are good enough to host, and we're talking about them right now. You don't hear about Stanford, you don't hear about Louisville right now, but you are going to hear about Louisville because you said you felt they were secure. But if they were to lose to Pitt and Stanford here at the end of the season, I think they might get a 5 or a 6 spot, even though those places are good. And Stanford has one chance to bump it up, and that's to get Louisville. So again, there's nothing for sure because the matches now at the end in the ACC really open it up for some movement in the polls.
No, it's a great point. I think it's also a spot where Penn State, Wisconsin can play their way in and potentially bump out a team like Louisville, or if Creighton does have a blemish in the Big East tournament. Meanwhile, you talk about the top 16, Mick. Let's look at the top 16 because the media always puts in a poll every week that is the Volleyball Magazine Super 16 poll. Utah jumped their way in. They've also got Dayton in at the 15th spot, dropping out Minnesota. I think Minnesota is a team that I would like to see hosting. Georgia Tech also drops out of the 16. I think it feels like regionally they kind of need Georgia Tech to host or Florida, one of those teams, because if not, you got all these teams in the Southeast and they're all going to have to be flying away.
Well, that's for sure. But the strange thing about Minnesota is, are they a chicken or are they a duck? Because uh, the coaches really feel they're good enough to be top 16, but the results say in the other polls that they're ranking them anywhere from 28 to 32 in the RPI and the KPI and on the other polls have got Minnesota down. So what is the difference? Why such a variance in the thoughts about Minnesota?
I think it's because their big wins are massive, but they feel like a long time ago. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of a spot where, teams like Dayton just keep on beating all their opponents. I'm just not impressed with the schedule. And, even that big game that they scheduled against Ohio State's not a top 50 team. So it just kind of comes down. Texas plays against Oklahoma this week. That'll be their first matchup as new conference foes on Friday. I'm also really interested. Georgia Tech kind of needs a perfect run here this weekend to get back in that top 16 picture. Can't lose to Florida State or Miami. Meanwhile, Mick, there were some fun notables. Was there anything else that you want to talk about in terms of our top 25 here?
Only to point out that Oklahoma upset Texas at Texas, and Texas is going back to Oklahoma to try to get revenge this time. So this is actually a revenge match for Texas. The other thing is Dayton and Purdue. There's a thing the committee might do. If Purdue ends up 17th or something, and Dayton ends up 14th, or vice versa, Dayton ends up 17th and Purdue ends up 14th. I think they're going to see each other in the second round at either of their place. It just looks like that's a natural. And I also see Minnesota being drafted down in the first or second round to possibly Creighton. And that would be interesting because if the coaches are right, Minnesota can play those big games.
Yeah.
Watch out Creighton for an early upset bid by Minnesota. So those are some things I've been watching, looking at this top 25.
Oh, that gets me excited, Mick. Once we get to the end of November, we could start looking at potential matchups for the tournament. And then you've got Selection Sunday at the end of the month. Speaking of They announced the Elite Eight schedule, the first time that we'll be moving to a 4-day regional again. Mick, no longer will there be back-to-backs from the Sweet 16 to the Elite Eight. There is now a full spread Thursday to Sunday in mid-December, and the Elite Eight matchup on Sunday afternoon will be on ABC. So that's notable news coming from the NCAA and
And,
ESPN.
and you know what that could mean? That could mean that the state of Nebraska could host two regionals, and it wouldn't be a problem for television because they could spread those matches out, and all those Nebraska folks could go see four matches that weekend, just an hour apart. And so if you drive either to Lincoln or Omaha, you can get tickets for both and probably see them both because those matches will not conflict, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. I cannot wait to see if something like that lines up. Meanwhile, we got some TV ratings back from that Wisconsin-Penn State NBC matchup. And again, the sweeps are killing the audience, but still 670,000 viewers, top three all time for a regular season game. The most viewed Big Ten regular season game ever. Meanwhile, got a couple other notables, another record-breaking crowd for Auburn as they took down their previous high of 3,900 with 3,940 in the three-set loss against Texas. Colgate won the Patriot League in dramatic fashion with a reverse sweep against Bucknell, who was in second place, had a chance to jump over. So Colgate wins the Patriot. Dayton wins the A10 with a perfect season. Arlington perfect in the WAC, and USF wins the American, their first conference title in 22 years. Was there anything else that you saw around college volleyball? There's one more thing to talk about here.
I liked the Missouri-Florida match a lot. I thought Missouri is a team to watch in the tournament. They could upset some people. I hadn't previously watched them that closely. I thought they're playing well. I think TCU's got to watch out. They seem to be draining here at the end of the season. That's one I'd look at as far as slipping maybe a little bit. Florida State is still not shown us that they can play at a high level, and that's going to hurt them maybe in the selections right now. I think the coaches have them a little bit higher than actually the rating systems. So Florida State has got to show us something also.
Well, we finish our show with heartwarming news, and it was something that took the nation by storm this weekend. I saw college football accounts, top sports accounts posting this. You saw Louisiana Lafayette had their senior night, and on match point, they brought in their senior Sienna DiCapra, who had a torn ACL, to serve in Kirk Gibson fashion against Georgia Southern, Mick. And what does she do? She delivers with an ace
Ace.
to win the match. I got goosebumps talking about it. So that's just something that is the best. It's great to see. And if you haven't watched the video, try to look up Louisiana Ace maybe on whatever your preferred social media platform is. I'm sure it'll be there. So a hat tip to Sienna DiCapri there with a moment she'll never forget.
And it certainly won't be a football play, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, we thank you so much for joining us. Talk to you guys next week ahead of a really important Thanksgiving season finale episode week leading up into the selection show. As always, he's Mick. I'm Daniel, and this is Six Rotations.